How can volunteer assistants be utilized to fill roles that lack funding?
Well, I think, our principals are going to be the key people to determine that, and I know at every one of our schools we have a huge volunteer corps and volunteer support, so we certainly can expand that. The reality is core functions generally are not going to be happening well if you're totally relying on volunteers. We're in a district right now where we don't have a volunteer coordinator. That was a budget reduction about 4 years ago. So we rely on, in general, our individual school sites to coordinate their volunteers, and then as we receive requests and interests in additional volunteering opportunities, we do our best to refer those volunteers to the schools.
Next one up is from here at Ironwood Ridge. It's related to charter schools. How do charter schools affect the budget and how they are impacted by budget?
I'm going to turn it over to Scott, but again, I want to reinforce that at least for the last 2 years, there was a lower threshold for budget cuts for charter schools versus district K-12 schools in the state. And then in terms of how the other part of that question?
I'll give you the whole thing again.
Because I'm really not a charter school expert, but we'll do our best to answer.
How do charter schools affect the budget, and how are they impacted by budget cuts?
One thing that does affect our budget is when students are mobile and move back and forth between a district school and a charter school. And sometimes we don't know that's happening, particularly when it's a virtual school. We had one situation last year that there was at least 60 students, so that's how big the situation was, that we had enrolled full-time at our high schools in the district. And those students may have seen, the slides at the movie theater that say, call us, enroll for classes. So they were enrolled in the virtual school at night or on weekends and attending full-time at our schools every day. And after the school year ended, the following October, we basically had a deduction of our budget by about $80,000 for that concurrent enrollment that we had no idea was occurring. Another thing that will happen is a parent will enroll a student in a charter school and they'll call in sick at our school for a few weeks to see whether they like it or not, and then decide. So that affects our budget with a factor called concurrency, where we figure out who went where for how many days, and then we split up that student amount between the schools.
We just have two or three more, so if there's time, we'll just run through them. The second part of that submission from Ironwood Ridge is, what happened to the stimulus money Arizona could have gotten to help the schools?
Arizona did receive significant stimulus funds, and our district did receive significant stimulus funds specific to Title I and special education. We were able this year, and frankly this year it served to save us. We were able to do something called supplanting, which means that we could use some of that stimulus money for special education to cover some of our current costs this year. But as those of you who are pretty aware, and it sounds like we're pretty aware here, know, we have a funding cliff coming up at 2012, the end of next year, where those stimulus funds will be finished, and that will be a scenario where we'll have to address that in both special education funding issues and Title I. And then Scott can answer more.
And in addition to that, there was another pot of stimulus money that was used by the legislature to reduce the state's obligation to fund local schools. So for the first time in my 20-plus years in working in school finance, there were, within the maintenance and operation fund was actually federal revenue that was stimulus money the state took to use to reduce the state's expenditure to school districts in an effort to balance their budget. And that was for this fiscal year, and that money is going to be completely exhausted this year.
One more kindergarten question for you for the evening. Will all children who are entering kinder that are able to pay the supplemental tuition be guaranteed placement in full day?
We plan to do that. So full-day kindergarten with tuition we will provide. This first year tuition, as I bet you've been able to assess, we think is very reasonable and has the potential to have to assess whether or not this covers the costs and make whatever recommendations we need to make to if a change is needed for the 11-12 school year.
Last one, and then we have actually something great again. From Papa Creek, two-part. The first one, and we tackle it. Is it already available, or can it become available for taxpayers to have ongoing access to how Ampi spends all its money?
As a matter of public record, all expenditures are itemized as part of every voucher on every governing board. It's a matter of public record. I mean, if we actually tried to print it out on a regular basis, we'd probably start talking a stack of paper about this tall. The information is there on governing board meetings and is available for review, but it's not posted, it's not available on the website. And that would require a significant administrative expense that we do not have budgeted.
We certainly have, we certainly have the dollars in the classroom report that the Auditor General puts out every year that gives very good and complete information, at least in comparing school districts to other school districts in terms of the percentage of their funds that are spent on plant operations or administration or food services or transportation as compared to like districts. So that could be something that the questioner is interested in.
The next one actually stems from that first part in terms of expenditures. And I'll just throw it out real simple. Would you comment to our audience this evening about administration cost percentage and how it relates to the actual number of educators throughout the district?
As I mentioned earlier, there's a significant amount of data on the Auditor General's Dollars in the Classroom report, which is a report the Auditor General does that was a requirement from the passage of Proposition 301. If you look at that for us, what you're going to see is a steadily decreasing expenditures for administration for the district, as well as us being below the state average for administrative expenses, and as well as the state average being below the national average on administrative expenses. And that most current data on that compares a national data of 2007 that compares our expenditures from 08-09. That was released in February. That's go to ez.gov and go to the Auditor General's office from that website and actually find that report and see that data.
The last one is easy, and actually it's more of a comment or a suggestion as opposed to a question. And that's more for our folks here with Arizona Education Network, and they're asking us to consider speaking to an audience on this Saturday. Without committing to anything, we're always happy to speak to an audience. We can bring some folks together, we can bring some folks together and share the information. So that part's easy to do. Dr. Balentine, Mr. Little, thank you